All right, now we are going to discuss the concept of elasticity, and in elasticity, we will begin with price elasticity of demand, the PED. Now, when you're talking about elasticity, of course, what is elasticity? When we talk about elasticity, what is elasticity? It's the response to pressure, okay? Response to some kind of pressure. So, if you put pressure on a piece of wood, it's brittle, it'll break, okay? But if you put pressure on a rubber band, then it's going to respond to pressure, okay? So basically, when we're talking about elasticity, we're talking about responsiveness. So what is the pressure in the market to which demand is going to respond? The pressure in the market, of course, is price. So then how will we define elasticity? Elasticity is the responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in price, okay? So if we write it down, then elasticity is the responsiveness to a change in price. Responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in price. Now, what are the factors that determine the price elasticity of demand? Now, please be very careful. Do not confuse this with factors that affect demand. The factors that affect demand are different and they have been discussed in a different video. In this video, we are discussing factors that will affect price elasticity of demand, and in the next video, we are going to discuss factors that affect price elasticity of supply. How much will supply respond to a given change in price? It will always respond, okay? Please do keep in mind, it will always respond, and it will respond in the opposite way. If there is an increase in price, there's going to be a decrease in quantity demanded. But what is going to be the proportion of the change in quantity demanded? That is going to determine the level of elasticity. Let's look at okay, now this thing you will have to do graphically, mathematically, theoretically. All three are required. Let me just show you the graphs first, and then we can go to, this is a demand curve, okay? Now I'm going to use a very simple method of teaching children, the way we teach children. Now this is not at all the mathematical or the scientific method of teaching, but this is what I tell children as to how to identify a downward sloping curve, okay? So what is a downward sloping curve? This is a demand curve. This is a demand curve too. Why is it a demand curve? It's a downward sloping curve. Both curves are downward sloping. How do you know it's downward sloping? As you start moving on the x-axis from the origin, you will notice that the demand curve falls. If it starts coming down as you're moving from the origin to the x-axis, it's a downward sloping curve. So look at this curve very carefully. It is coming. Is it coming down as you are moving along the x-axis? Yes. Is this coming down as you are moving along the x-axis? Yes. It means they are both downward sloping curves. And rightly so, because they are following the law of demand. As the price of a product falls, the quantity demanded is increasing. So it's in the opposite direction. Price and quantity demanded are moving in the opposite direction, here also and here also. But as you notice, there's a lot of difference in both curves are falling and both are showing a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded, but there's a massive difference between their gradient. The steepness of the curves are completely different. This steepness is a measure of elasticity, okay? This steepness is a measure of elasticity. Look at the first curve. Look at the first curve. What's happening? Let's say that we start from point A. We're starting from point A, and point A, the price of the product is P1. Okay? The price of the product is P1. And what happens? That the price then falls to P2. We reach point B. Have a look at what's going on. Initially the price was P1 and the quantity that was being demanded was Q1. Let's say this is the market for cars, and this is the classic example of an elastic product. When the price is P1, the quantity is Q1. But if you reduce the price a little bit, it falls from P1 to P2, there is a massive increase. Okay, the proportion of increase in quantity is much greater. So there is a massive response to any given change in price. So the flatter the curve, the more elastic the demand. Okay, so it's going to be very, very elastic. Look at now this is the market for cars. Okay, complementary good. This is the market for oil. Car doesn't run without oil. Okay, whereas the market for cars is extremely elastic, the market for petrol or the market for oil is extremely inelastic. Okay, what happens if there is a massive increase in the price of oil, in the price of petrol? Initially the price was P1. Okay, but then there's an oil shock. Okay, the oil shock came in the 1970s, 72 and 78, and then again there was an oil shock in 2000, 2005 I think. Okay, where prices rose massively to $150 a barrel. Okay, what happened? Did we put our cars in the garages? Did we stop driving? No. Yes, we did respond by cutting some of our travel. That will always happen because that's the law of demand. Whenever there's an increase in price, there will be a fall in quantity demanded. But that fall will be a very small proportion of the increase in price. So that is what's going to happen here. There is a massive increase in price. Okay, the price has risen massively from P1 to P2. But against this massive increase in price, there is a very little decrease in quantity demanded. Okay, there's a very little decrease in quantity. There will be a decrease. If you say there will be no decrease, the answer is wrong, because by saying that we are going to violate the law of demand, which can never be violated. Whenever there's an increase in price, there will be a fall in quantity demanded. Whenever there's an increase in price, there will be a fall, and whenever there's a decrease in price, there will be an increase in quantity demanded. The relation has to be opposite. But what is the level of change in quantity? That is elasticity. So this, for a very small change in price, there is a massive increase in quantity demanded. For a very big change in price, there is a minimal change in quantity demanded. Alright, this is relatively inelastic because the response is not very good. This is relatively elastic because the response is very good. Now, let's look at this mathematically. How will you express this mathematically? Please write it like this. PED, price elasticity of demand, is equal to percentage change. This is delta. Always write, don't write change, write percentage delta. Quantity demanded. Why? Because the quantity depends upon the change in price. So the whatever depends upon the change in price is going to be the numerator. And write price. Okay? If you write change in quantity demanded, you miss this. The answer is wrong. This is percentage change in quantity demanded. It's not change in quantity demanded. Please be very careful about that. Why? Because quantity demanded is in numbers. Price is in dollars. You can only compare like with like. You can only compare like with like. So if you have numbers here and you have dollars here, comparison is not possible. So what do? We convert the change in number and the change in dollars to percentage. Now both are in percentage, now they are comparable. Okay, so that is the formula for this. Now let us apply. We will just apply this formula and we are going to see. Let's say that for a product, we are talking about cars. Okay, for a product there is a 100% decrease in price. There's a 100% decrease in maths is always shown by the sign minus. We don't do this. You put a sign of minus. So the decrease is 100%. So what is the, because of the decrease in price, what is the increase? Because they move in the opposite direction. Decrease in price will lead to an increase in quantity demanded. So what is the increase? The increase is 300%. Okay. So percentage cancels. This cancels. The answer is 3, but it's always the sign minus. Okay. So on the exam, if you do not put this minus sign, the examiner will not mark it wrong. He will not mark it wrong because he understands that the relationship is always negative. But the interpretation of this 3 is very important. Now this is what I'm going to teach you, how to interpret this number 3, because there is no unit, there's only a number. What do you mean by elasticity 3? Now this is how you read it. On the numerator, what do you have? Quantity demanded. On the denominator, in the denominator, what do you have? Price equals to 3. Alright. Now, according to the basic rule of math, any number which is given to you is that number multiplied by 1. Sorry, that number divided by 1. So, quantity demanded corresponds to 3. Price corresponds to 1. So, how are you going to read it now? Remember, math is a language. You should learn how to read it. So, how will you read it? Here is the way you are going to interpret and read it. For any given change in price, for any 1 unit change in price, there's going to be a 3 unit change in quantity demanded. You don't have to say decrease. It can be a decrease or an increase. But for any 1 unit change in price, there is going to be a 3 times greater change in quantity demanded. So what does it mean? It means that the demand is relatively price elastic. It's responding very well to a change in price. The same applies here. Now what happens here? Here there is a 300% increase in price, and against this 300% increase in price, there is only a 100% decrease in quantity demanded. So what is the answer? 1 upon 3. Is it 0.6? Yeah, I think it's 0.6. The 0.6 minus. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that for any 1 unit change in price, there is only a 0.6 unit change in quantity demanded. So very little change in quantity demanded. Quantity demanded does not respond much to a change in price. So this is inelastic, or we call it relatively inelastic, and this is elastic, we call it relatively elastic. Quickly, I want to look at what are the factors that contribute to price elasticity of demand. Please do keep in mind, if a product is a necessity and its price goes up, you're going to try to reduce its quantity, but it will be very little. So this, if it's a necessity, it's inelastic, relatively inelastic. But if it's a luxury, you can do without the product. Okay, you can do without the product. So no problem. You are going to delay your purchase right now and in the future. So this will be elastic, this will be inelastic. If the product is addictive, okay, if it's cigarette, if it's tea, if it's coffee, okay, it's a habitual product. You can also use the word staple here. So certain things are staple. If you go to Mexico, chili is a staple. If you go to India, rice is staple. If you go to Pakistan, bread is staple. Now, when the price of flour rises, what happens? Do people stop eating bread? No, they cut their demand for bread, but they cannot leave bread. It's a habitual staple product. So, demand will be inelastic. Demand will not respond very well to an increase in price. Proportion of income. When I was a child, one big bag of salt used to cost 1 rupee only. Okay? Now that 1 rupee was a very small proportion of the income that my father was earning. Today the same bag costs 25 rupees. What is that? A 2000% increase in price? But 20 rupees today is a very small proportion of my income. It doesn't pinch me. It doesn't hurt me. So demand remains relatively inelastic. Price can go up, but my demand is not responding. I'm not decreasing my demand. Substitutes. If substitutes are available, coffee becomes expensive and there's a substitute called tea. So I'm going to give up coffee and I'm going to switch to tea. So demand for coffee is going to be elastic. Okay? But if there were no tea, then what would happen? Then demand will remain inelastic. Time period is a very interesting thing. Time period is a double-edged weapon. It can have two impacts. Okay? In the short run, we do not have substitutes. Okay? There is a situation where in the short term, we do not have substitutes. In the long run, what do? We bring in more factors of production and we develop substitutes. So where there are no substitutes in the short run, what's going to happen? Demand will be inelastic. But when substitutes are developed in the long run, demand becomes elastic. Now that's only for certain products. Okay? Petrol. Initially demand was inelastic. Then natural gas was developed as a substitute. Demand became elastic. But then there are certain products for which it is the other way around. When the mobile phones came, they were a luxury item. Initially demand was elastic, but over time they became so important that everybody started using them, and now it's become a way of life. So now the demand has become inelastic. So it's a double-edged weapon. There's one last thing that I want to say. Please keep one thing in mind. Short run, medium run, long run. Now when you talk about run, the word run is used only in economics. It's not used in business or accounts. So run is not term. There they use the word short term, long term. The long run is the period in which all factors of production, land, labor, capital and enterprise, all factors of production can change. They are variable. The short run is that period of time where only one factor of production, which is labor, can change. The others are fixed. So it's not measured in terms of time. If you can alter all factors of production overnight, then that one night is your long run. And if over 10 years you cannot change any factor of production except labor, then that 10-year period is your short run. Okay? I hope this is clear. A lot of concepts were involved, so please do revise it. And if you have any questions, please do leave them in the comment section. And yes, please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and click on the bell. Okay? Thank you. See you soon.